Hello, hello, hello. Good morning. Trying to get everything started. Hope everybody's having a beautiful day. Also on YouTube, and on YouTube, I have a couple of websites up so that you can kind of see some stuff following along. Since I figured out how to do share screen on YouTube, it seems easier or better than my camera even over there. So if you are looking to see some of the sources or looking to see some of the information on the conversation that we're having, you can switch over to the YouTube channel, which is like right down there, and watch over there to see some of the different stuff that we have going on. Off of my website, because I'm just using my Widda Ord website where I have the links set up for everybody. So you can actually take a look through with me and see some of the discussion and some of what's going on. And I'm almost done with my little sharing thing, but I try and make sure I share this out to people that I know want it to be shared out to before I get started. And so I'm going to go ahead and try and finish that up really quick here. And then we'll go and get started. We seem to be having like some TikTok issues over the last couple of days. I'm not seeming to be able to kind of stay on for some reason. It kind of keeps bumping me, and it doesn't seem to be getting up on the FYP very much. We seem to be staying pretty low viewer content, but that's okay. I'm trying to figure out why. I think it might be because, you know, those live groups that want you to join their little thing where they can do their live support stuff. I joined one of those again because they asked me to, I'm not sure if that's what's causing the low viewership. I tried to contact them and see, but they think that it's just because I haven't been going live enough recently. So we'll see. So we're going to try and go live a little bit more. Today, as I talked about the last couple times, I'm just trying to go over Homo erectus again for everybody as I'm getting started on the new account, and I have new followers and new people who haven't seen this from the beginning. I want to make sure that everybody has the same base of understanding of what's going on as we move forward to discuss things that we've discussed in here before. So if you've been around before, you kind of know some of the different things, like the different humans and shit like that. But trying to make sure that I have a good basis for everybody to understand before I move forward, so that, you know, again, I come in here because education isn't free, and I need education to be free because not enough people know enough information, right? And it's really keeping half society in this lower standing. And so if we can have enough education that's free to get out there to everybody else, to make sure that that information's out there. And so I want to make sure that everybody has that kind of base level. Hello, good morning. I see a couple people in here who I absolutely adore. Good morning, Sleepy. Good morning, Salty. I think there's some other people here, but I haven't seen other people's names come across. I've only seen Salty and Sleepy. Salty is like liking the live all over the place. I love you, Salty. You're so sweet. And then I've got Sleepy in here. So it's been pretty low. It's been pretty low in here lately. And I've got Alan Solm over on YouTube. If you want to see some of the websites and some of the articles that we're dealing with in this conversation, I am doing a screen share on YouTube so that we can see those things, so that people can get like a little bit of a visual some of the stuff. This is just my website where I've compiled different articles and stuff, my bibliography website. So that is over on YouTube instead of seeing my face. So if you want to see some of the articles, they're over there. So what I want to go ahead and talk about today is kind of what we were talking about yesterday before YouTube got all, or TikTok got all shaky on me and wouldn't like stay up. And that is, how we have seen this huge change recently within the last couple of years of our understanding of the speciation of our species and the species Homo erectus that came before us, which is the species that I kind of view as our grandfather species, right? So when we're looking at, okay, awesome, Sleepy. It's good to see you. What we're looking at prior to the last couple of years is our belief of speciation being very, this idea that speciation happens only when you're isolated, right? Only when a group is isolated from the rest of their community does speciation happen. Because we know that speciation in a large part happens due to adaptation for environment. So if I have like 30 people from my community who get trapped in a mountain pass or on an island, they're going to speciate in that space they're going to adapt to that space. And over time, the adaptations to that space are going to change them to the point that they become a separate species from their original community. If we look at like Homo florensis, who ends up on an island in Indonesia, and we kind of think that Homo florensis, we know that they come out of erectus, but we think that it's through Homo ergaster, right? So Homo florensis is a group of Homo ergaster that ends up on an island in Indonesia. Now, we have something called island giganticism and island dwarfism that we see within speciation. And then again, speciation is an adaptation to the environment. Island giganticism and island dwarfism is adaptation to environment. If you are in a small space with not a lot of large natural predators and not a lot of food, not a lot of nutrient, then you're going to shrink to accommodate the space. You don't have large predators to be large enough to scare away, so you don't need to be as large. You don't have a lot of food, so you want to shrink your needs for nutrients, so your body mass shrinks for your needs for nutrients. And you don't have a lot of space, so you want to shrink the space that you take, so you're not taking up too much space, so more people can take up space. So island dwarfism with Homo florensis is Homo florensis getting separated from Homo ergaster and being on an island all by themselves, isolated, right? And adapting to the island's environment, adapting to being in a small environment with not a lot of predators and no large predators and not a lot of nutrients. So I shrink to adapt to the space. And over several thousands of years, because adaptations take 100 generations for an adaptation. So for current Homo sapien, that would be 2,500 years. Depending on the length of the generation, it might change. If your generation is 14 years, then it's going to be 1,400 years, right? So one adaptation being fully realized does not speciate you, though. So if your singular adaptation is going pale because you're in a higher, lower sun content, higher latitude environment, that does not speciate you separately. You've just adjusted one adaptation, right? Yet if, like with Homo florensis, your adaptations over the course of several hundreds of generations are shrinking and getting larger feet, because our hobbits have larger feet, right? If that's your adaptations, it might completely speciate you. If your isolation is A, completely isolated, and B, for thousands of or hundreds of generations, then your isolation is going to speciate you. So this was our understanding of what speciation was for the last 100 years. Like, since we developed an understanding that speciation happens, all the scientific knowledge going into it has told us over the last 100 years that this is how we speciate. Within the last year, we've learned that that's not how Homo erectus speciated, and that's not how Homo sapiens speciated. And this is really important for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons that is always at the forefront of my mind and that is really, really huge to me is the fact that when we look at Homo sapiens when we look at what Western thought tells us about thought processes, we look at thought processes as being from a monolithic standpoint. Like we have this singular idea of what perfection is, this singular idea of what community is, this singular idea of what the species is, this singular idea in every shape, way, or form. And we have this idea that we're supposed to be reaching a singularity, right? This, for me, really came about, or not really came about, but was really demonstrated really well in a discussion I had with my biological father. I did not grow up knowing my biological father, but we have some similar lives. And I grew up, I'm Indigenous. I grew up in an Indigenous community. I grew up with Indigenous understanding. My father did not, but my father has moved among Indigenous communities since he was a young man. And he is well known in a lot of Indigenous communities across the United States. And he has, he's moved within and understood and listened and heard, right? But I wrote a book a while ago, a child's book. And the book that I wrote was talking about we are we, and it's talking about the whole, right? That we are all a whole. We all come together. And when my father read the book, he was talking about, well, this is Indigenous understanding that we're all one. And I tried to get him to see that the difference is that in most Indigenous understandings, it's not that we're all one, it's that we're all whole. That it takes all of us to make a whole, but a whole is never a singular. It doesn't have a singular thought. It doesn't have a singular idea. It doesn't have a singular action. It doesn't have a singular way of behaving. It has many different complex ways of behaving and thought and action. And it's those many different complex ways of behaving, thought, and action coming together that make a whole. And that whole never becomes one. Because while my community might be a whole community, there are still dozens of other communities out there. Well, my body might be a whole body. There's still dozens of other bodies out there. Well, my mouth might be a whole mouth. This mouth comes with teeth and a tongue and uvula and tonsils, all of these other things that make this singular mouth into a whole comprised of many parts. And even then, it doesn't become a singular on any level. Western thought tells us that when a whole becomes a whole, it becomes a singular. It thinks with one thought, it thinks with one action, or works with one action, it acts in one thought process societally, and it moves as a unit. But that's just not reality. Nothing in this world ever works like that, right? Nothing in this world is ever monolithic. Western thought tries to keep us on this thought process of monolithism, because if I can keep you striving for an unattainable, not real perfection that is my monolithic idea of it, then I can keep you suppressed, I can keep you down, I can keep you under my control, and I can keep the maintenance of the hierarchy that keeps me on top and you on bottom, right? So Western thought really works on this monolithic idea. When we look at this new understanding of the way speciation happens, hey, beautiful, it takes this understanding of monolithicizing humanity, monolithicizing any society, monolithicizing anything, and turns it on its head. Because the new understanding is that we do not come from a singular, we come from a many, right? This new understanding is that Homo erectus comes from a many as well. One second, my cat is trying to get in. Come on, Percy. Come on, baby. So because we now realize that Homo erectus comes from a many and Homo sapien comes from a many, this understanding of how we come from a many really flips that mono, that singularity on its head, right? So the new understanding states that but our ancestor Homo erectus comes from 3 different species combined. So those 3 different species that get combined to make Homo erectus are Australopithecus africanus, which is Lucy, Paranthropus boisei, which you may know of as the Nutcracker Man. And we know that Paranthropus boisei also is a species that this last 2 years we also realized was the creator of our Oldowan tool complex, our earliest tools, and not Homo habilis. Homo habilis being the 3rd species that we now believe that Homo erectus comes from. Now, how do these new species come out of a convergence, which is what that is, of many different species? What happens is if you look at, say, the continent of Africa, which is where this is happening, right? And you look at the continent of Africa as a whole, And let's actually, let me see if I can, on the YouTube channel, pull this up. Let me see. And I'm going to try, and like I said, I'm doing stuff on YouTube where you can see the, so you can see stuff on YouTube that I'm talking about, because I'm doing a screen share on YouTube now so that you can see what I'm talking over there a little bit better. I'm going to switch up the screen share over there to a new tab. And we're going to look at the continent of Africa over there. If you're looking at the continent of Africa, this is just, I don't even know where this map comes from. It's a map that I pulled up over here. And if you're looking at the continent of Africa and say you have a community of 3 different species, which we find all throughout ancient hominins, living in Libya, and you have a community of 3 different species living in Kenya, and you have a community of 3 different species living in Angola. Okay, it's great to have a map up because I can actually see countries. We all know I'm geographically challenged over here, right? So when we have these communities, first I want to, and we always talk about this, it's a really good vocabulary lesson, the difference between tribe and band. Tribe is a community whose citizenship is based on genetic lineage. Think of the Hebrew community. Your citizenship as a Judaic human being is based on your genetic lineage. You can have never lived in Israel, but if your parents are Judaic and you are a member of the tribes of Israel, then you have citizenship in the state of Israel. All you have to do is go there, right? This is a community where your citizenship is based on your genetic lineage. It has to do with who your parents are. The United States is a community based on band. It is a community based not on your genetic lineage, but on the needs of the community and on the needs of the individual coming into the community, right? So you can come from Algeria to the United States and get citizenship in the United States, right? It's an immigration. And your community is not based on, or your citizenship is not based on your genetic lineage, but on the needs that you fulfill within the community and the needs that the community fulfills for you. So again, tribe is a community where your citizenship is based on your genetic lineage. One second, that's a VA calling and I have to answer that. Hello?
Hi, this is Tessa with the Portland VA. I'm calling for Morgan.
This is?
Hi, I was just calling. Did you get my message last week about the appointment we had to cancel?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So they've established your provider with Lisa Sampson.
Okay.
See if we can get you rescheduled with her. I was looking at her schedule and it's pretty tight, but she does have an opening on the 13th, which is next Monday at 2:30.
2:30, I'll be there.
Okay. Perfect.
And that's in Hillsboro, right?
Hillsboro, yes.
Perfection.
Have that real quick. Make sure that it stays where I put it. Okay, perfect. I got it on Lisa Sampson's schedule for the 13th, and that'll be at 2:30.
Awesome sauce. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye. Sorry about that. Plastic dimension, I'm not sure. We're not talking currently about modern day populations. We're talking currently about 2 million years ago populations that predate our species completely. At this point, we're talking about the species that's our grandfather species and how our grandfather species came about. So there would be no genetic ties today to something from 2 million years ago in an entirely different species. So absolutely correct. I'm also talking in hypotheticals right now to try and explain something. So I'm not talking about, oh, we saw 3 different communities and it did it again. I'm going to try and restart and see if we can fix this. I am not sure what is going on, but it keeps doing this weird thing with me where it like shuts me down. I'm not sure. So we're not talking about communities that are current. We're talking about communities that predate us. And I am talking in hypotheticals at this point because, you know, because we're talking about 2 million years ago, right? Like, and I'm not trying to like give exact space. I'm just trying to give information and explain it. And by giving a hypothetical, I can explain it better. So in a hypothetical, if we look at Homo erectus, and again, the difference between tribe and band is a tribe is a community based on genetic lineage, and a band is a community based on need of the community, where citizenship is based on need of community, tribe citizenship based on genetic lineage. So if we have bands of species, of 3 different species that are living together in several different spaces across Africa, say we have a band in Algeria, a band in Kenya, and a band in Angola. And in these bands, we have these 3 different species. Again, these species at this point, because we are talking about how Homo erectus speciates, the species at this point are Paranthropus boisei, Australopithecus africanus, which is Lucy, and Homo habilis, which is who we have long associated as our first toolmaker, though we now know that that is Paranthropus boisei, and who we have long associated as our first Homo species. And they are still our first Homo species, so this much may shift a little bit in the coming years as our understanding is shifting. Paranthropus boisei may become a Homo species because of the fact that we see that they're our first toolmakers. And that's something that we, for some reason, associate as uniquely human, though we do know that other animals do it, right? So, but these different bands of humans are living in different areas of Africa. You have a band, say in Algeria, who maybe an Africanus and a boisei together create your first visual Homo erectus. And maybe in Kenya, a habilis and a boisei create the first image of Homo erectus within their community, the first child within their community that looks like what we would today describe as Homo erectus. And maybe in Angola, a Homo habilis and an Africanus create the first Homo erectus child within their community. Now, within these different communities over the years, several different Homo erectus children are coming into these communities through a mixture boisei, and another one is born to Africanus and habilis, and another one is the child of, somebody who's habilis and boisei and somebody who's Africanus. So like maybe one parent is half habilis and boisei and the parent is Africanus, right? And so together they make an erectus child. Now, it's important to understand as we're talking about the emergence of new species, whether it's ours, whether it's Neanderthal, whether it's Homo erectus, that your grandparent is never going to look at you and see somebody who's a different species. No grandparent ever looks at a child and sees somebody who's a different species, except for today, we have some racists out there, and even then that's not another species. It's just their racism showing, right? So your grandparent isn't the Australopithecus grandparent isn't going to look at their erectus child and go, oh my God, you're a Homo erectus. They're going to go, hey, grandkid, right? So as these several different communities are creating Homo erectus children by their convergence, we see that over the course of time, all of our communities throughout history, throughout prehistory, are constantly migrating, are constantly moving, constantly have this interaction with each other. So if you have children in Libya and children in Kenya and children in Angola, and then in the center, we have the Republic of Congo, right? Or maybe we're looking at Central African Republic, right? And maybe every 5 years, there's a meetup there. or every 10 years, there's a meetup where many different communities come together and converge and share information and share genetics. Most communities don't marry within their community just because of the fact, or unless it's like bands will marry within their community a little bit more than tribes will marry within their community. But bands even then are very likely to grab people from outside of their community to have babies with, just because of the fact of the larger genetic pool to grab from, right? It decreases inbreeding, and inbreeding is bad for everybody. We've always known this, right? I mean, there have been kings and queens who haven't quite understood that, but overall, as a species, we've always known that inbreeding is bad, right? So because they're coming together and they're constantly intermixing, you see that the erectus child in Libya and the erectus child in Kenya and the erectus child in Angola are able to meet, right? And so when you get enough of these erectus children and enough of these erectus children meeting, you create an entirely new species. Hey, you look like me, let's have babies. Hey, you don't look like me, let's have babies. Hey, you don't look like my mom, let's have babies, right? Like this difference. And so when we see this, we see the start of a new species through the convergence or intermixing of 3 prior species. This is not an evolution from a single species. This is not evolution through isolation. It's actually evolution through massive peoples coming together instead of isolating. Up until the last year, this has literally been considered a theoretical method of speciation. Hold on one second. Yet another cat. There are like 4 of them in this house at this point. Come on, little one. When the Sunny Shine moved in, he brought cat and dog with him. So now we have 4 cats, 2 dogs. It's just a household. So this speciation through convergence, being theoretical until the last year, really again changes our conception of what humanity is, right? We go from this Western thought process idea that humanity is a singular, right? We go through this Western thought process idea that humanity is only a single, that we are monolithic, that we think the same thoughts, that we do the same things, that we enact in the same way, that we interact in the same way. And there are, of course, very many things that everybody does. Everybody breathes air. You know, everybody breathes air. Everybody eats some form of food. No worries, no worries. So, you know, there are certain things that a species all does, right? There are certain things, like every dog walks on 4 legs, right? Every human walks on 2, right? Like there are certain things that everybody does because they're basal or characteristics of a species, right? Yet thought processes, actions, things like that are never really monolithic within species, not even in other species, and definitely not within human species. That's one of the things that really separates us from everybody else, is that we think on an individual level. We don't have a hive mind, right? We think on an individual level, we create on an individual level. And it is that thinking and creating on an individual level that gives us tool usage, that gives us fire, that gives us everything we have, right? Because it is that thinking on an individual level that gives us the ability to create, to invent, right? So we know that Homo erectus is coming together through this previously theoretic method of speciation through convergence. So now we've proven that speciation through convergence happens. In the same studies, they found out that Homo sapien also comes through speciation through convergence, right? Now, what speciation through convergence gives us is this higher level of genetic material to work with, right? So Homo erectus comes about at 2 million years ago, and within 100,000 years, they've left Africa. They're the first human species to leave Africa, the first hominin to leave Africa. And as they're leaving Africa, we see that at 1.9 million years ago, we have a tooth in Georgia, the country, not the state. Homo erectus leaving Africa, moving across, and they literally do move across the globe. As they move across the globe, they speciate in isolation in several different areas across the globe. And so we see them go from Homo erectus to Homo heidelbergensis to Homo neanderthal in Europe. We see them go from Homo erectus to Homo heidelbergensis to Homo denisovan in Eastern Eurasia. We see them go from Homo erectus to Homo ergaster to Homo florensis in the island of Flores in Indonesia. We see them go from Homo erectus to probably Homo ergaster. It's a relatively recent study, so we're not exactly sure yet, into Homo luzonensis in the islands of the Philippines. We see that within Africa, they continue this convergence and create Homo naledi, which is a species that carries some of Homo erectus traits and some of Africanus's traits, Australopithecus africanus, Lucy's traits, right? And then has some of Homo sapiens traits 2,000 years, like 200,000 years before Homo sapien has them, right? Because they have the globular lobal brain that makes us who we are today. And that's why there are first evidence of burial and our first evidence of art. And that's Naledi in Africa, right? So we see that as Homo erectus is moving across, I'm going to switch up the screen again on the YouTube. So if you're following along on YouTube, be right back. I'm going to go back over to the website that I have up because it has a timeline on that website. So if you're looking to see some of the timeline, some timelines, I'm a little bit weirded out by some timelines. Some timelines are a little bit here and a little bit there. And so some timelines, you got to take them all with a grain of salt a little bit, right? Because you might get different information on different timelines, usually, like 100,000 years difference, right? But this one, for the most part, seems to be pretty decent, right? So as we're looking at this timeline, we see, so they put Boisei way in the wrong space. Like if you're looking at the timeline on YouTube, you see Paranthropus boisei comes around, after, I guess slightly before habilis, but it's really more within the erectus timeline, right? And they have habilis within the erectus timeline instead of before the erectus timeline, and habilis is before the erectus timeline. So you'll see even on this thing on YouTube that there's a little bit of, well, that doesn't quite ring true with some of the other information. And of course, this is probably a couple years old. Most pages are. I'm not sure as I'm looking at this. Let me see if I can find a date on this one. I know that on their actual page itself, it gives dates. And this website itself actually has a lot of different links. And so it's pretty, I would say it's pretty accurate, though I would again state that some of the dates are going to be a little bit off. Like this one says Homo erectus is from 2 million years ago to 50,000 years ago. And most people will state that Homo erectus is from 2 million to 170,000 years ago, just as example. And so when we're looking at this, it also puts Homo neanderthal from 300,000 years ago to 28,000 years ago. Now, the 28,000 years ago, I've heard tale of like 30,000 years ago for Neanderthal. So I would take that low date, but we now know that Neanderthal has been around for 600,000 years because that's a more recent find, right? So as you're reading through these sites, you have to understand that some of them have a little bit of outdated information, right? Because again, we're looking at a field where massive changes have happened in the last 5 years. When we're looking at how Homo erectus comes about and seeing that Homo erectus comes about through that convergence of many different species, that convergence gives Homo erectus this very huge genetic diversity that we see in the species that we consider to be the offspring of Homo erectus. Now, it's important to note that we don't have a genome for them, so we're going completely off of visual. And we don't have a genome for any other species other than us, except for Denisovan and Neanderthal. So we are literally going off visual skull impact. We do not know what the genetics are, right? The visual skull impacts show that Homo erectus seems to have created about 14 different half of anthropology or paleoanthropology calls subspecies. It might be changing a little bit as well as time moves on, and we're learning about, this speciation through convergence as opposed to speciation through isolation. The subspecies that we look at that Homo erectus created would be ergaster, Rudolfensis. Though some people place Rudolfensis slightly before Homo erectus, like this website does, and have not. Heidelbergensis, Gorgicus. The Gorgicus's name has been changed. There are different species now. And within this, we've also, and this one doesn't even list some of these species. So we're also looking at antecessor, and we're looking at, let me see if I can find a list of species. Hey, creature, you're not going back outside unless you're going back outside. 1 second. Let me let this back out. Well, you're not supposed to do that, you goosey cat. There you go. Go on. Hey, I'm going to shut the door. Put your tape off. No, that's not what I wanted. It's not going to give me this subspeed. Oh, wait, maybe this one will. Oh, no, that's not it. Okay. Okay. So when we're looking at Homo erectus, we see Homo erectus subspecies. Yes. So the son's cat's name is Creature with a K because it's from Harry Potter because son's stepmother named him. He was living there. Not these hominins. Nobody. So we're talking currently about Homo erectus and the subspecies of Homo erectus. So we're not talking about. We're talking about the ancestors of our species, not the ancestors of me personally, right? So I'm not talking about your ancestor. I'm talking about our species ancestor, if that makes sense. So it would be as a whole ancestral and not as a singular ancestor. Well, and again, we're talking about an entirely different species. Though DNA changes every 10 to 15 years, we're different people now, right? Genetically, well, not necessarily. Like we can see that the genome for Homo sapien at 70,000 years ago is relatively similar to the genome from Homo sapien now, right? There are adaptations because of environment, and there are genetic adaptations from mutations, right? And so there are going to be differences now that we may not have seen 70,000 years ago. Homo sapien in Africa isn't going to have the genetic adaptation for a Homo sapien currently today in Northeast or Northwest Europe, right? Yet they're still going to have the ability to have that genetic adaptation. So like if we're looking directly just at the phenotype of skin, right? So at 70,000 years ago, the phenotype of skin for every Homo sapien across the planet was dark. And at 70,000 years ago, there are some Homo sapiens in the Near East on the Arabian Peninsula. There aren't really Homo sapiens outside of there. There have been some Homo sapiens out, but they're not considered to be the ancestors of who we are today. Like they're considered to be Homo sapiens from lines that died out, basically, is what they're considered usually. And so when we look at, say, the human genome, baby girl, when we look at, say, the human genome from somebody who is 70,000 years ago, and again, if we're just looking at like phenotype, right, skin tone, right, you're not going to see anybody who has the phenotype of lighter skin, but you will see that they have the genetics to create the phenotype of lighter skin if necessary. So the phenotype of lighter skin is just an adaptation. Let's see if this is going to come back on us. It seems to have been shut off on us again. I swear to God, this thing is driving me insane. I apologize. This thing is driving me insane today. I do not know exactly what the fuck is going on. It keeps shutting down on me. I really do not know what's going on, but thank you. So if you look at the possibility of having the genetic for the phenotype for light skin, it is seen in Homo sapien from 70,000 years ago. It's just that they don't, the possibility is there, like the alleles to create it is there because the alleles for light skin are 900,000 years old. The alleles are there, but nobody uses the alleles, right? So the genetic is present, but nobody's using the genetic, right? So our genes haven't completely changed. It's that some of them have become a little bit more forefront, right? Some have become a little bit more to the forefront or have gone a little bit further to the back, depending, right? And it's all about adaptation for the most part, to environment. And that's even like, how they say that Black people have a tendency to have heart problems, right? They've now realized that it's not because they're Black and they're Black genetics, it's because of redlining and the places that they're put into, right, here in the United States. So when we look at, and that's one of the things when we look at debunking the theory of race that is really huge in the debunction of the theory of race, is that we realize that it's not really genetics that play so many of these parts. It's actually space that plays these parts. It's environment that plays these parts or influences these genes to either mutate or to come forward or to recess, right? And so you're going to see that the human genome from 70,000 years ago is the same human genome from today. Just some things are in front and some things have been pulled to the back, right? So they are still the same, right? Though, again, we were talking about Homo erectus. And again, Homo erectus is the ancestor of our species, but it's not my individual ancestor or your individual ancestor. She is all of our ancestor, not just my ancestor, your ancestor, all of our ancestor, right? So when we're looking at how they're moving about, we see that as they're moving about, they start to speciate in isolation in some areas. And when they speciate in isolation in some areas, we get species who have a narrower genetic genome, right? And we as a species actually have, for other species on the planet, like we have 25,000 genes within our genome, if I can remember correctly. Whereas many species have like hundreds of thousands of genes within their genome. We have a very low amount of genes within our genome in comparison to others, but we have high genetic diversity within our species still. And we have like a higher genetic diversity than it seems that Neanderthals did or Homo denisovans did. And part of that lower genetic diversity within Homo Neanderthal and Homo heidelbergensis, Homo denisovan. And I say only these two because those are the two that we have the genomes from, right? Part of that lower genetic diversity is part of their die out. Now, I have to remind people all the time, Neanderthals lived from 600,000 years ago to, 170,000 years ago is the common accepted, right? That is over 500,000 years as a species, basically, right? I'm sorry, Neanderthals is not 170, that's Erectus. So Neanderthals are 600,000 years ago to 30,000 years ago. I apologize, I mixed the two. So with Neanderthals, we're looking at 600,000 years almost as a species. We've only been around, to our knowledge, for 300,000 years, and that's newer information, right? The 300,000 is newer information. So it's not like Neanderthals were less than us, right? They lived longer than we've lived, right? So it's not like we outcompeted them or we outdid anything with them. Their species lived through its species time, right? Every species on a planet has a time, right? Like everything on the planet, there is a time for birth, there is a time for death. Life is a cycle, right? No species is going to be there forever. I mean, some are, for a couple of million years, but even then they've adapted into something completely new. Like, right. And like, we don't look the same as 300,000-year-old ancestors, because if we do, then where would that lead, right? So like, if you look at the chicken is the descendant of the dinosaurs. It's been around for millions of fucking years, but it does not look like the dinosaurs anymore, right? So Homo neanderthal was around for 600,000 years. They survived us as a species so far, right? We have to hit 600,000 years to be out surviving them as a species, and we haven't, right? So when we are looking at that, that concept is important to understand, because so many people are like out there going, oh my God, we killed off the Neanderthals, and we didn't. We actually saved the Neanderthals. So because the Neanderthal species from less genetic diversity, right? So they only speciate from, yeah, they do, right? Well, and if dinosaurs all have feathers, which is the current thought process, then chickens might really look exactly like dinosaurs, just be miniature, right? So, or some of the miniature dinosaurs, right? So maybe, we don't know for sure, right? I could be totally off on that one, right? So, when we are looking at, not an animal, geneticist, right? So when we are looking at the way that Homo neanderthal speciating from Homo, and they think that Homo neanderthal probably comes from Heidelbergensis, an antecessor, right? And so that would give them two species that are both Homo erectus subspecies that they speciate from, which gives them slightly more genetic diversity than speciating from one species, right? And yet still we know about Neanderthals that they, over their like 600,000 years as a species, they were never a very large species. It was thought up until we pushed the date back 100,000 years ago that there was only 500,000 Neanderthals during their entire time as a species. Now this has probably changed in the last year. And the reason that it's changed in the last year is because of the fact that we now know that Homo neanderthal actually went through two near extinction events, right, where they had dropped down. By the time we are leaving the Arabian Peninsula and moving out into Eurasia, Neanderthal is only about 10,000 as a species. And in that 10,000, they're becoming extremely inbred. Uncles marrying nieces, aunts marrying cousins, like things like that. So when they come in contact and they start coming in contact with us, we know that they come in contact with us at least 200,000 years ago, because around 200,000 years, the Y DNA in Neanderthal that was a Denisovan Y DNA is replaced by a Homo sapien Y DNA. We do not have a Y DNA from Neanderthal at all. So we know we've been in contact with them since at least 200,000 years ago. So that ability to bring our DNA into the mix helped end the inbreeding, and actually is the reason that there's more Neanderthal DNA on the planet today than there was during the time that the species was a species whole, a whole genome species. So this comes from the fact that we found a species that was extremely inbred at the time that we found that species. And by finding a species that's extremely inbred, that species is like, shit, you look new. Let's get some new DNA in here. Because again, all species know that inbreeding is bad unless we've fucked with them like dogs and cats, right? All species know that inbreeding is fucked up. So species won't naturally inbreed unless we've fucked with their genetics, right? Fragile Y does seem to be a problem for most. I know like RY is degrading. RY is a degraded X and RY is disappearing. They say that RY will be disappeared. I mean, they say RY is going to disappear in a million years, and who the fuck knows if we'll have a species in a million years, right? So maybe we'll disappear before the Y disappears, right? But they do say that RY is disappearing. It is actually a degraded X, and it actually does not provide anything into the code that you cannot get from the X. Even the gender switch that it provides is something that you can get from the X. But it is literally the only thing that the Y provides right now that is imperative, basically. Like it's the only thing that the Y provides, because everything else on it is non-coding genetics, I think is how they refer to it. DNA is not my strong suit, so I might be using the wrong wording in that, but the Y is definitely disappearing. So with Neanderthal, the lack of a Y in Neanderthal can mean a couple of different things. It could be that the sex coding gene within Neanderthal never lost its leg, its X leg, right? Because an X and then a Y is just an X where one of the legs is gone, right? So, and that's what a Y is it's just one of the legs of the X has disappeared, faded away, right? So it could be that with the Neanderthal, the X gene coded for the sex change. And so we see two X's within Neanderthal, male or female, right? Or it could be that the X gene within Neanderthal faded away and they replaced it with Denisovan because it had been there, but it had disappeared. they do know, like, if the Y gene, if the Y chromosome disappears within us, it's not that we will stop having those who possess penises and testes. It's that it will code differently to give us penises and testes. It's not that we will lose men completely. It's that the coding to become male will come from somewhere else, basically. So it is very possible that the coding for male within Neanderthal comes from somewhere else. We've only found 4 male Neanderthals. Of all the Neanderthals that we found that we have done DNA testing on, almost all of them are female. And of them, actually, like, we thought that most of them were male and they turned out to be female, because it turns out with Neanderthals that the females in sexual diaphorism are actually the larger of the species within Neanderthal. So the sexual diaphorism of size within Neanderthals is different than the sexual diaphorism of size within Homo sapien. And so what we thought were male Neanderthals, and turns out are female Neanderthals. Why are people stuck in primate hominids when life didn't start there for us? It started in the ocean. Well, life starts in the ocean like millions and millions and millions, like hundreds of millions of years ago, like probably billions of years ago, right? And I personally am stuck on how we came about. Mainly, when I was younger, I understood that we were all animals. I remember somebody telling us in school or something like that we were all animals, and everybody like being offended. And I'm like, what the fuck did you think we were? And I was young. I mean, I didn't say fuck. Well, I probably did, because I've been cussing since I was really young. But I was like, what do you think we were? We're fucking animals. Like, we're just a mammal. We're just like every other animal on the fucking planet, right? So I've been fascinated with how we came about since I was really, really young, which is part of why paleoanthropology has been a fascination, right? Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. 3.5 billion years ago is the start of life. So I focus on us only because, well, the understanding of who we are as a species can change our understanding of self today. So many people think that who we are as a species is violent, and who we are as a species is innately evil, right? Who we are is a species. Yeah, thank you. I didn't see half of it. I wasn't even trying to get into it, so I didn't see half of it. I had people sending me shit, so I would see the start of it and like get rid of it just because I wasn't gonna. But so, people think that we're innately evil, and people think that we're innately violent. And my study of humanity has shown me that that is not true, right? What is true is that we are innately compassionate, and we are innately empathetic, we are innately communal, and we are innately nurturing. These things come from mutations that are caused psychopathy. They come from personally, I call it the narcissistic God kings, but that's just so that I can come up with a singular term, right? So for me, I study the history of us because, well, he would have had to enter a debate with me for him to have dominated jack shit. And I didn't enter a debate with him at all. I called him out when he was wrong. Well, and I didn't even start with that. Like, I started with, hey, I understand that you don't understand this concept, so let me show you what this means, right? Because that's what I'm here for. And then, of course, see, when you're attacking me instead of attacking the science, you've proven that you've lost the battle, right? You've lost a debate. If you're attacking the scientist instead of attacking the science, you're not debunking the science, right? And so at that point, you've lost the debate. So he thinks he debated me, but he never entered into a debate with me because he's not my educational equal. And I won't bully and abuse people on TikTok by being their educational superior and trouncing them in a debate, because that's just not appropriate. So, right. So when we're looking at the reasoning why I look at the way we speciate, it's because I've learned over the course of my knowledge and of the course of 40 years of really trying to study most of this stuff, that we're not what we like to think we are, right? And that For me, the belief that we're all innately evil means that if you're innately evil, you can't change that. We can't change things that are innate about myself, right? I can't change if I innately have blue eyes, I can't change my blue eyes, maybe some contacts, but it's not like I can really change them. I can just change the perception of them, right? So if you believe that you're innately evil, you can't change it. It's innate about you. But if you understand that nobody's innately evil, then the things that you think of in yourself that are bad, you can change, right? If you think that, you're innately something, if you think that you're innately bad, how can you change something that's innate about you, right? Yet, if you can see that it's not innate, it's not natural to you, it's unnatural to you, then you're more capable of changing it because you can see the problem within it, right? Which is really why I come on here, anyways, at the base, right? Because so many of us have this perception of our species as being this really bad, evil thing, right? And we've done some pretty bad, evil shit, but as a species, we're not bad and evil. And if we can get back to that understanding, if we can get back to the understanding that as a species, we actually take care of each other, then in that ability to get back to that understanding of a species being able to take care of each other, then we can move forward. We're at a point in our species existence where we might become the first species to cause its own mass extinction, which is really weird, right? Really weird that we would be the first species to cause our own mass extinction and the mass extinction of other species on the planet, right? So I hope that by changing our perception of our species that we can change that. We don't cause mass extinction, which is part of why I'm here too, right? Because if I can change your perception and make you see that there's not anything wrong with you, that it's wrong with society, that you're not innately bad, that you're innately good, and that it's really society that's fucking that thought process up, then I can help change the perception. And if I can change the perception on a broad scale, then maybe I can help my community on a global scale, right? So when we're looking at these things, that's why it's important to me. And we just did it again, didn't we? It did. Did it completely shut me out? I'm still here. Thank you, Manny. I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't even know what's going on with TikTok today. It's really, this has been the last 3 lives, and I don't know. I don't know. So when we are looking at how we are as a species, those are very important things. Because it has given me so many problems, and I do have some other stuff to do today, I did want to try and come in and I'm going to see what I can do to fix the issues. But and so because I'm trying to fix the issues, I'll definitely come back in tomorrow and see if I have gotten the issues fixed. But I'm going to go ahead and end for today. Of course, I'm going to end in the way that we always end, because this has been a part of this conversation today too, and that's very important, especially for those who are newer into this area. So yes, so in my profile is a website, widdaord.com. And on that website, I basically compile bibliographies, sources. It's just a compilation of sources that I have. Almost all of them are ones that you can easily access without paywalls, because that's huge to me, is that you don't have be gatekept through paywalls. But there's, and they're all just like, take that article and do more searching on that article. Like if you look, the one that's currently up on my website right now is under Homo erectus. On my website, there's tabs at the top: home, artist use, rewriting the Western Hemisphere, bibliographies. Under bibliographies, hybrid children, Homo neanderthal, Homo erectus. I'm on Homo erectus right now, if you can see on my website, or if you can see on my YouTube, right? And on that, you see that there is this, it says, Wiki shows Wallace line best. And so you see a thing of Wiki's source on the Wallace line to the right-hand side. But then you're going to this website that says Hominid Species Time, right? And that's a website that's embedded. So you just scroll down that website, and at the bottom, it says for resources on this topic, see. And it's got Donald Johnson's site at Arizona State University, becominghuman.org, right? So all of these websites that are all of these articles that I provide should have ways that you can find the anthropologist who created the articles that the article is written off of, right? So an article, the New York Times is going to be written by a journalist, but that journalist is going to reference an anthropologist. So if you're reading an article by the New York Times, and in that article it says, Mary Leakey said this. She's a famous early anthropologist. Mary Leakey said this. In this article, it'll say, Mary Leakey said Lucy comes from Widda Gorge, and she said it in this article. And so what you're going to do is search Mary Leakey Widda Gorge, Lucy. And that will give you the ability to find Mary Leakey's article on Lucy in the Widda Gorge. So these articles aren't meant to be a full information for you. They're meant to give you a basis of information so that you can go out and find more information. Thank you, Daphne. Within all of these, it gives you the ability to kind of dig a little bit deeper. I don't want to fully educate you because I feel like if all you're doing is hearing my words, you're not going to get full education. We learn best when we're seeking it, when we're digging in and we're trying to do more. And that's what I want for all of you guys, is to dig in a little bit, right? I'm just giving you the basis so you can dig in a little bit. All of my studies have told us and have told me that we are biologically nurturing and communal, right? Biologically, that nurturing and community is innate to our species. It's essential for species development and essential for species growth. How do we know these things? Well, biologically, we're the only species alive today that has what's called mandatory midwifery. There's only been one other species in the history of the world that we know of that had mandatory midwifery, and that was Homo neanderthalis. And this is because of the shape of the head and the size of the head, and the shape of the shoulders and the size of the shoulders, and the shape of the pelvic outlet and the size of the pelvic outlet. So it detect inactivity, made me do stuff. So when we're looking at the pelvic outlet, it's shaped like this. So is our head, so is our shoulders, but our head is shaped like this, and our shoulders is shaped like this, and the pelvic outlet is shaped like this. So unlike any other species of animal, as our babies are being born, their nose faces the back. And we pull them out by turning them twice, 2/4 a turn. So the first turn, their nose is facing the back, so their head is from back to front, right? And as we're pulling them through this passage, we have to turn this head this way to get it through. So we turn them 1/4 turn sideways. Now their head's through. What about their shoulders? Their shoulders go the other way, and they have to be turned another 1/2 turn. So they come out facing up with the shoulders side to side, slipping through the birth canal, right? We have to have somebody help us. Now, some of us can, I can feel my own cervix, right? Some of us can reach inside and they can feel shit. Some of us are flexible. Some of us can probably reach down. I mean, if you've ever tried to reach a huge old belly to wipe yourself, you know that's a little bit hard, but some of us can do that, right? So this isn't something that, I mean, we've all heard tales of, women having babies in rice fields, or, women going off alone and having babies. Even within those, usually, like if somebody's having a baby in a rice field, they're usually getting help from somebody else, right? And do you need to go out? I can open the door for you. 1 second, everybody. So what we see is that we must have somebody help us give birth to our children. Mandatory midwifery means we must have community to give birth. And we have 5 life stages, from newborn, neonate, first out of the womb, to full brain development at 25, right? That is why our brains are so knowledgeable, why we have so much information in our brains. Most other animals, snakes never see their mothers. They don't have a neonate life stage, right? Horses are done within 2 to 3 years, fully grown. Elephants are like 8 years or 5 years. Bonobos are like 8 years. So like elephants and bonobos, they have longer life stages than most other animals, but they still don't have as many life stages as we do. Thank you. I have like 4 of them and they're all over the place. So with those life stages, because we have as many life stages as we do from neonate to adult, and if you think about, these are stages of intense knowledge development, intense brain development, right? From neonate to through that first life stage to where you're walking is basically that first life stage. From neonate to the point that you're walking, you learn so many different things. There's so much information. And you can't get that from one person. You need to have nurture from many different people, right? And right. It's hatches and then it's gone. Well, like snakes, right? They hatch and then they're gone, right? So because of the fact that we have so many life stages, we have this intense need to be nurtured. They did studies in the 50s where they took orphans. This is horrific, and I apologize ahead of time. But they did studies in the 50s where they took orphans and they took 2 different groups and they put them in 2 different rooms. And one room, they propped up their bottles and they never touched them except to change their diapers. And in the other room, they loved them, they hugged them, and they held them, and they fed them and everything else. The room where they didn't do anything, they died. It's called failure to thrive. Failure to thrive is a very real thing within infants and children who are human. We must have touch. We must have interaction. It's how we learn. It's how we develop our perception of the world around us. And so we must have nurturing. That nurturing has been proven to be needed to come from more than one person. It is not your mother's job to nurture you from neonate to adult. It's an entire community's job. Thank you so much, Tamara. So good to see you, beautiful. It is an entire community's job to nurture a child from neonate to an adult, because it takes many different concepts of nurturing. I wouldn't call myself American Indian. I am indigenous to Turtle Island. I know through lines I can trace my ancestry, and many of my grandmothers were enrolled members of nations. I am not. So I would not call myself American Indian. I would call myself indigenous, just because of the fact that when my grandmothers were enrolled, I'm not, and I'm not capable of being enrolled. And I don't think that it would be appropriate to call myself by a legal term that I don't actually fit, right? And this is actually Ogham. It's Gaelic, Celtic Indigenous. It's Irish Gaelic translated, or like it's speak out, translated into Irish Gaelic, and then written into Ogham. But with that, we've seen throughout history, we've even done studies recently that show us that it really does take an entire community to nurture a child. In ancient communities, having about 30 members is typical in a 30,000 years ago community, right? And that's kind of the minimum amount that you need in a community to maintain your community, right? You need at least 10 people to go hunting. And the reason that you need at least 10 people to go hunting is because you need to protect yourselves, right? You need at least 10 people to hunt and protect yourselves. And it's the same thing for like gathering anything. If you're going to go to a berry bush, pick berries, you need 5 or 10 people. You need a couple people to watch that the bears are coming while you're picking the berries, right? Same thing if you're going down to the river to get water, you need a couple people to watch from shore to make sure that there's not a crocodile coming at you as you're getting water out of the river. Right? So you need at least 5-10 people every time you're going out of your home space, right? And then you probably need at least a couple people in your home space to make sure it maintains protection. You definitely need at least one person in your home space that's keeping your fire going, right? And then you probably have at least one person in your home space who's no longer out in a whole lot of moving. So maybe they're making tools, or maybe they're making clothing, or maybe they're making, other utensils to utilize, right? So in that, we see that most early communities really have the ability to control childbirth, and really only having children once every 5 years. So if you have a community of 30 people, one woman will give birth, and then 5 years later, another woman might give birth, right? And this is because the fact that you are keeping your, children are hard to maintain, and they're noisy, and they attract predators, and you have to keep them out of the fire, and you got to keep them away from the cliff, and you got to keep them away from the sharp things, right? Like, so you have one child 30 people are raising so that they can ensure that that child is healthy and safe to adulthood. So again, this means that We are communal, and we need multiple people to nurture a child from neonate to adult. We are communal and we're nurturing innately as a species. These are biological imperatives to our species. We live in a time when these biological imperatives have been demonized, when these biological imperatives are considered to be weakness, when these biological imperatives are trained out of us by religion, by school, by thought processes. We have a major world religion that teaches hate is love, that teaches you that you should hate everybody else around you because they don't do what you want them to, right? Like, so we live in a society and in a community that tells you to isolate yourself, tells you should not feed the homeless, tells you should not take care of each other. So very many of us deal with depression, deal with anxiety, deal with many, many issues of just feeling like we're the issue because we know there's an issue. So it must be us because everybody else seems to be doing just fine in this crazy world, right? So it can't be the world itself. And I want to tell you today that it is the world itself. Society itself is fucked up right now. And if you're feeling anxious and depressed, or you're feeling like you're the problem, or you're feeling like there is a problem, it is not you. You're having a healthy response to a very unhealthy society. This society teaches us that what is innate about us is not even there, and teaches us that we are things that we are not. So when we are living within this and we are dealing with this anxiety and this depression and this feeling that you're the problem or the issue, I want you to understand that you are not only not the problem and not only not the issue, but it is your ability to see that there is a problem that makes you necessary to our species survival. It makes you necessary to change. You cannot change things if you don't know they need to be changed. So if you are aware and you are seeing the problems out there, then you are aware that the change needs to happen and you can help it happen. Every human being has a right to life just by being born. Just by being born, you have a right to life. And life needs nurture, and life needs community. For humanity, for a human's life to actually work, they must have community and they must have nurture. So everybody who breathes is worthy of love. And everybody who breathes is worthy of compassion and empathy and grace. And we live in a society that teaches us that that is not the truth, right? We live in a society that teaches us that, your worth is based on your paycheck. And if you're not bringing in a high enough paycheck, nobody should give you any props, right? And so today I want you to realize that your worth is based on the fact that you're breathing. And because you're breathing and because you're alive, you are worthy of love. You are worthy of empathy. You are worthy of compassion, and you are worthy of grace. And you may be living in a space with a community that's not giving you any of that. And if that's the case, please make sure that you're giving yourself, right? Okay, Mom, not me, right? You're following me. Just double checking. I just wanted to make sure. So, to recap. Yeah, I thought so because I've seen you on my list. I was like, wait. To recap, just by breathing, you're worthy. And you are worthy of compassion. You're worthy of empathy. You're worthy of love. Just by breathing, just by existing. Every human being on this planet is worthy just by existing, right? Because that right to life comes with the right to love and nurture. That doesn't mean that as an insult, you have a right to the girl down the street, right? It does mean that you have the right to your parents loving you. You have the right to the community taking care of you. You have the right to care and the right to nurture. Okay. So if you're not getting it anywhere else, make sure you get it to yourself today. Know that I love you. I don't care if I've ever met you. The fact that you're a human being and you're breathing means that I love you. Until you show me you're a complete and utter asshole. And even then I'm still going to love you. I'm just going to think that, you're not fucking thinking right, So if nobody else feels like they love you today, then I am guaranteeing you there are people out there that love you. Know that I love you just by being here, just by breathing. And I love you even more by the fact that you understand that there's something wrong, that you can see it and you're trying to change it, that you're a part of the change and the effect. And that increases your worth for humanity, for the community. The fact that you see that there's a problem, and the fact that you're trying to change it, and the fact that you're trying to be part of the solution, increases your worth to community and increases your worth to our species survival. And I just want you to know that. I am, I don't know, I'm an animist, right? More than anything else. Love is my religion, right? And it's not like lyrics from a Bob Marley song. I believe that energy is what makes us all, like scientifically. And we'll see if this actually comes back. Let me see if I need to. See if we can do this. TikTok sure loves me today. I consider myself, for me, love is my religion. We are all made up of energy. I totally, completely believe that. I believe that energy is love. I believe that the atom and like all that energy, I believe is love. And for me, I believe since we're all made up of energy, anything I do that affects you actually affects me. So if I were to hit you, that energy affects me. It's not karma, right? Like I'm not necessarily like it's going to come back on you. It's the fact that if I have, this is one person, this is one person, and 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 this is all the community together, right? If I damage this one person, it damages the community. So if I'm this person and you're this person and I damage you, it damages me because I'm part of the community and you're part of the community, right? It's not like karma. It's the thought process that any energy, interacts. And I don't necessarily believe in gods, right? I believe that all gods that we've ever had are archetypes that we've created. The Bad Durenberg shaman, I think, is a really great example about that. I did one video on her. I've been meaning to do a couple more videos, right? But the Bad Durenberg shaman is somebody who, through genetic deformity, actually could go to trances, right? And there's some really cool shit about her, but she was literally buried in worship for hundreds of years. There are offerings placed next to her burial 300 years after her death. Her grandson or great grandson was buried after she was dead. She was 30 when she died. Her great grandson, like her grave was reopened and he was put in there when he died as an infant, right? So, and then she had a red deer horn antler headdress, right? The red deer horn antler headdress, they found 300 years later, two of them buried facing her within 3 feet of her grave. The Tonga people of Russia are where the word shaman comes from, and that's why they call her the Bad Durenberg shaman. The Tonga were colonized by the Russians in like the 1600s. And when they colonized them, and they started applying the word shaman to everybody who uses animistic practices. So she literally, they're still using red deer antler headdresses in the animistic practices of the Tonga people today, right? So her legend and her who she is has carried down for 9,000 years within her community, right? And so for me, when you look at like Odin, what you're seeing is a god that was a man that existed, that maybe had some form of, like in Bad Durenberg shaman's case, she had this this protuberance in one of her vertebrae that if she tilted her head back to the left, she'd enter into a trance state, right? And so maybe Odin had, maybe there was a man called Woden, and Woden had, some, like Woden lost his eye, and because he lost his eye, it gave him the ability to kind of see internal or something like that, or it gave him more knowledge, right? And so that has been passed down through legend for thousands and thousands of years until he's built up into a god archetype, right? And so for me with that, that makes sense. Yeah, and that's what I think it is. I think that all of our gods and goddesses, all of our deities come from an archetypal thought process of, excuse me, I think in some cases, like the Bad Durenberg shaman, there was probably a real person who lived at one point in time, and their story passed down into myth, passed on into legend, and became a deity. And in some cases, so like Zeus and Odin are basically the same god, right? Maybe it's Zeus and Thor, because Zeus and Thor have a little bit more in common, right? But you have, or it's easier for me with the trickster god because I'm a trickster god follower. Coyote and Loki and Spider, they're the same god. They're the same deity. The deity of using intelligence to get you to understand a new thought or concept when you don't want to, right? The deity of using this kind of tricksy nature to get you to understand a concept that you don't want to understand, right? We see this in every single pantheon that I can think of. And because we see it in every single pantheon that I can think of, to me, what this means is this is an archetype in humanity. This is something that we see in many different types of humans. And so because we see this, we created an archetype for it. Same thing with fertility gods. This is something that we need within our species. And so because of it, we've created an archetype for it, and that archetype represents it. And then I think when we put energy into something, create happening, right? So if I am now, not always, of course, because my energy is combating 6 billion people's energy at this point, right? But if I put some energy into something that I can not necessarily make it happen, but bring it into beings, or not necessarily bring it in being, but like influence is happening. Again, if we're all energy, right? So if I believe in an archetype that's a fertility archetype, and I'm putting my energy into fertility archetype, I'm putting my energy into my own fertility as well. And so that's more likely to increase fertility, which then I associate with the God giving me that, right? So I think that it's like that. And for me, indigenous knowledge is hundreds of thousands of years old. Indigenous knowledge is science. And I will tell you that every single day of the week, our science comes from Homo erectus. Our science predates our species. And indigenous science predates our species. Indigenous people across the globe have maintained scientific knowledge. Currently, Western science, which is a new science, which is a science that was outlawed for 1,000 years. And so what we see is new science. Western science is confirming indigenous science all over the place. Theory of speciation through convergence. The understanding that there were Homo species from Homo erectus on every continent on this planet. It could be, Homo giganticus was here in Turtle Island, right? And we do know that there was a Homo species here in Turtle Island before Homo sapien arrived, which we've just found out in the last couple of years, right? So when we look at it, Western science is currently confirming indigenous science on a daily basis. And one thing that was pointed out to me really recently was there's a real difference between creation stories and migration stories. Almost every creation story I've ever heard is scientific in its detail, because almost every creation story I've ever heard states that we were created out of the biome in some form, in some way, in some shape. Right? And being created out of the biome in some form, in some way, in some shape, whether it's from the earth, whether it's from the stars, whether it's from the wind, whether it's from the sky, whether it's from the water, being created out of the biome in some way, shape, or form, which is absolutely scientific, right? Because we were created by the biome. So literally every indigenous creation story across the planet is correct, because every indigenous creation story across the planet talks about being created by the biome in one way, shape, or form, which is exactly what happened. And almost every migration story, or at least every migration story that I've heard of so far, can be proven through, and I don't like proven anymore, can be confirmed by modern science. Right? Stories of coming here in boats has been confirmed by the Kelp Highway and the new looking of Southern Pacific route through the islands of the South Pacific. That's possibly 54,000 years ago, right? The knowledge that there were other people here when we got here, right? Because that's in some people's creation stories. The concept of being created here, which is also in some people's creation stories, which really gets confirmed by the idea that there was a Homo species that was here when sapien arrived. And we know that we kind of enveloped that Homo species into us. That Homo species became part of us, right? And so we were absolutely created here for those of us who have the Homo species within us, that ghost species, right? So Western science is currently confirming indigenous science across the globe. My brain has always worked with indigenous science before it went to Western science. And I think that that is probably really significant when it comes to my ability to conceptualize these things a little bit differently, right? Case in point, I knew that we had a southern boat route here before finding Western science. And I knew this because half of the nations that I know of in the United States or in, Turtle Island, half the nations that I know of, Abayala, talk about getting here on the West Coast on a boat route, and that boat route is not on ice. Hey, give it. That's not okay. You don't need that. This is Grand Dogger. She is half Great Dane and half Pit Bull. She is 8 months old. She's huge. She's sweet. So, yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, and people have always lived in coastal regions because it's easy to get food from the water. Right. And we know that the global climate changes that happen, because we're in a cycle of climate, right? That the way that those climate changes happens when the water melted at the end of the last ice age, right? The sea levels rise on all the coastal areas, right? So sea levels rose by hundreds of feet, right? So you have people who have been living on the coastal areas for thousands and thousands of years who no longer have a coast. They've been flooded, right? So the flood is confirmed within Western science, right? So when we look at that, I truly believe any creation story or migration story you throw at me, I truly believe I can find a confirmation of it in Western science. All of that said, I didn't see you get blocked. Oh, I see. Hold on. I'll make sure that you're not. I don't know why. Yeah, I see. And I did. I see. I'm not sure why. I'll find out why. Don't worry about it. Anyways, I am going to go, everybody. I will try and come back again tomorrow and see if I can get this to work better tomorrow, since it seems to be giving us problems. And we'll discuss the subjects tomorrow. We'll probably discuss, I think we've discussed a lot in the last couple. Hi, Tristan. Do I believe in vibration and the law of attraction? Yes, but not necessarily like that means that you can affect the entire world. What I mean by that is kind of what I touched on when I said there's one of me and there's 6 billions of you. So if my energy that I'm putting out is for world peace and 6 billion people's energy is for war, my world peace energy from one is certainly not going to give us world peace when 6 billion energies are putting out for war. So will I believe that my energy can affect things? I also know that my energy is not, the only energy out there. There's millions and millions of energies that will conflict with my energy or counteract my energy, right? So I do believe in the ability to manifest to some extent, but I also believe that you can only manifest so much because you have 6 billion people trying to do the same fucking thing, right? I'll keep asking for peace. Absolutely. I'll keep working for it, right? I'll keep being actively working for it, right? To try and make sure that I can change 6 billion energies' minds. That's probably true, Timothy. Okay, so I am going to go, but I will be back tomorrow because we're trying to make sure and figure out what the fuck is going on. Hi, I'm Luke. You just got here, baby, but I'm going to leave. But I will be back tomorrow. I'll make sure, and it's going to probably be around the same time. I drop off my kid at around 8 o'clock, so it'll probably be in an 8 Pacific Standard. It has been up on YouTube, Anna Luke, so you can go over there and watch it. You won't see my face. I've been talking the whole time, but I've actually, because my camera isn't working the best, I actually have been pulling up sites from the website over there. So you'll see things on that. But I will be back tomorrow, 8 a.m. Pacific time, roughly. Okay. Much love, everybody. Take care. Have a great day and have a great night. And remember that you are loved, and remember that you are worthy of love. Remember that you are not the problem. You are a part of the solution, and take care of yourself today. Thank you, Red Road Warrior. Have a great day, everybody. And my darling loves on TikTok or on YouTube. I see that there's still 2 of you guys left over here. Take care. Have a great day. I will be on YouTube again tomorrow so that you guys can watch along there as well. And I hope you guys have a great night. Remember that you are loved, and remember to take care of yourself.